Hello everyone, it's Lisa with you today for Picket Studios. I'm going to be creating a Christmas card for you today using one of the items from the August release plus a few items that were released last year. So here is a look at the card that I'm going to be making for you, and I wanted to do something slightly different with the wood stamp that was released last year, so I decided to create a frame with it. First of all, we're just going to take a look at the items that I'm going to be using. This is a Christmas flower. It has a coordinating die with it, and that will be the main focal point of my card today. Next up is this set. It's the A2 Tall Grass and Waves with tile and wood floors. This was released last year, and this is what I'm going to be using to create my frame today. This set here is the Fancy Christmas Sentiment set, and this does come with coordinating dies as well. I'm going to be using some black hybrid ink from Picket Studios along with weathered wood distress ink, and these sequins here are called A Snowy Season. And for my colouring today I'm using a bunch of Copic markers. I'll show you all the numbers as we start to move through the card. Okay, so we're going to start by creating the wood frame, and for this I'm going to take some memo tape here. I'm going to cut it in half so that it's a little bit less cumbersome, and I'm just going to adhere that from corner to corner. I'm stamping onto Nina Solar White Classic Crest £80 cardstock, and I do have a sticky mat in my Misty. I find that that's a really useful tool to have when the stamp is bigger than the actual panel I'm stamping onto, as it holds it in place. So I'm inking up the stamp, and I'm using weathered wood distress ink for my colour today. I really wanted this card to have a light and airy feel, so I went with a grey wooden frame. I do, however, have a sample of a card to show you later on where I have done a brown wooden frame, so stay tuned for that. I've removed the memo tape, and I'm now going to turn the panel around and re-adhere the memo tape from corner to corner, and that's going to allow me to stamp the other end. The process is the same for this end of the panel. I ink up the stamp again with the weathered wood. I have cleaned that in between moving the panel around so that it's clean every time I stamp a different edge. And I'm using the stamp scrubber to clean off my stamp today. This is a great tool to remove the ink because it doesn't leave any residue on your stamp. I'm lining up my stamp here for the two sides. You can see how easy it is to line that up. I simply just put the stamp down where the straight edges kind of end on the left and the right hand side, and I do that before putting my memo tape down because it's a little bit harder to see once the tape is in place. So again, I've inked up that stamp, and I'm going to just stamp that down and repeat the process for the final side. Now when the panel is actually finished, you might notice, although I don't think it's very obvious, that the two areas at the side of the panel are slightly thinner than the areas that have stamped at the top and the bottom. That's simply because I want to make sure that the corners are lined up, but you really don't notice it in the final card. We're going to move on to colouring now. So this is a Christmas flower, and I'm going to stamp this down onto my £80 cardstock using black hybrid ink, which is really good for colouring with all mediums. And I do a double stamp just to make sure that I have got a really good impression. We're going to start off by colouring the leaves, and I've got G07 as my darkest colour. So for each leaf I'm just going to lay that darkest colour around the edge and a little bit down through the middle as well. What I want to achieve when I do the colouring of the leaves, and indeed the petals as well, I want to kind of leave a white highlight in the centre. So I'm going from dark to light with my lightest colour kind of in the center of each of the leaves and each of the petals. And here I do the same again on this leaf. So first up is the G07, and I have sped this up slightly, and I will speed up through all the leaves. I'm now laying down YG17 and then YG03, and then I'm just blending them out each time. So the process again is the same on that third leaf with the G07 followed by YG17 and then YG03. I don't normally colour in this way. I would normally colour from dark to light, say from the bottom of the leaf through to the top, but I thought I would try something different today and try and achieve that highlight in the centre of each side of the leaf. So that's why I chose to colour it this way today, and I like how it turned out. Going in here now with Y17, that's just to give a little bit of colour to the berries in the middle of the flower. And now I'm going to move on to the petals, and all the numbers are up there on the left hand side so that you can keep a note of them if you want. I've moved my R89 marker off to the side. That's the darkest of my 5 markers, and I'm only going to be using that at the end on the petals just to add a bit more depth. But the main colouring on the petals will be in 4 markers, and that is the R29, RV29, RV14 and RV13. I'm going to continue working through the petals now, and I'm colouring them in exactly the same way that I coloured the leaves. So my darkest shade will go around the edge and also down the centre. Then I'll go in with the RV29, then the RV14 and RV13 for the white highlight. I really like this colour combination for a poinsettia. You do start off with the reds, but obviously I'm moving into the RVs, which makes it slightly more pink on the petals, which is often what you see when you buy one of the flowers. So I'm going to continue to move through those, and then I'm going to take my R89 once I've finished all the petals, and I'm going to add some shading with that. I'm not going to make you sit through each of the petals. I didn't film all of it as it is the same for each one. The flower is pretty much finished now. I'm going to grab that R89 marker, and I'm just going to colour the veins down the centre of each petal with that, just to add some depth down the middle. And I'm also going to use that R89 to add some shade in other areas of the flower. So where you have a petal that sits underneath other petals, I'm going to use it and add some darker colour in there just to sort of make the other petals stand out a little bit more. It's a small detail, but it does make a difference to the final flower. So now the colouring has finished. I'm going to take the coordinating die. I'm going to adhere that down with some low tack tape and run it through my die cutting machine. When I put the flower down on top of the frame, I thought that it seemed a little bit flat, so I thought I would add some shading into the frame just to see if I could make it pop a little bit more. So I took a ruler and the C4 marker and I went round the edge using that. I didn't trust myself to freehand that. And you'll see as I did that 4th edge, my marker came away from the ruler a little bit, and I will fix that. But for now, I'm going to continue to work down through the numbers. So I'm freehanding C3 all the way around the frame here. But the remaining colours, the C2, C1 and C0, I actually only use those on the top and the right hand edges just to give that a little bit more depth that side. I noticed a tiny bit of red had gone outside of the line on the flower, so I took a colourless blender and I just went over those 2 bits where I could see it had come out just to tidy that up. And that little mistake with the marker, well, this is how I'm going to cover it up. Simple. No one will ever know that I came outside of the line there. For my greeting, I'm going to be using Fancy Christmas Sentiment. So I take the Peace on Earth sentiment and I'm stamping that down onto a £110 Nina Solar White Classic Crest cardstock, and I'm using black hybrid ink, and I double stamp it to make sure I get a crisp impression. I'm then going to take the coordinating die and I'm going to run that through my big shot, and then we're going to start to assemble the card. I've added some wet adhesive onto the back of my frame panel, and I'm just going to adhere that down onto an A2 top folding £110 base card. I've added some pieces of foam tape to the back of the flower and the sentiment, so I'm just going to remove those backings and adhere those down over the top, and you can see there I'm covering up that little error that I made earlier on. I think that the shading that I added around that centre part of the wooden frame really does help to make it pop. And there are other ways that you could achieve this. You could actually create the wooden panel, cut out that centre rectangle and then pop it up with foam tape. You could also perhaps create the wooden frame and then add some more depth and dimension by ink blending darker inks over the top. That would also help to make that flower pop a little bit more. I'm adding a final bit of detail with some sequins from A Snowy Season Sequin Mix Plus, just to add a little bit of sparkle. It is Christmas after all. I really like how this card turned out, but you may remember that I mentioned I had another sample for you. This one I created with a brown wooden frame, and I used the Holly Jolly Christmas stamp and die set. I didn't do the shading on the inside of the rectangle on this card, and I really think that you can see the difference. And also that sentiment, I couldn't let the opportunity pass by. I had to use that sentiment on a card. It says, "It's that time of year again. Bust out your fat pants." What a great sentiment that is. So on that note, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found this useful, and I will be back to share another project again with you soon.